Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. One of the things that I love about this title, Inventory Management, is when you show up, I know you're here for a very specific reason. And we all have a lot of different perspectives on why we want to solve this problem. Just before the session, I was talking with Tammy, who works up in northern Wisconsin. Small center, excessive surgeon preference items that you're trying to deal with, right? Remy, over in Southern California, is working at a bariatric facility. She's trying to order inventory, get it in so that they can facilitate growth. Jacqueline is a coordinator at a 17 OR facility in Washington, D.C., and she's trying to change the culture of the hospital to really pay attention and look at this inventory management problem. It's interesting, when Remy made a comment to me just 2 minutes ago, is, hey, we're getting older and we want to be able to go home and get away from work and not have to deal with all the constant phone calls. So we all have our reasons for being here, but this whole inventory management issue is really a monster of a problem. And it often haunts us in our day-to-day lives as we work in the operating. That's why we're here today. And we're going to look at really finding a true long-term sustainable solution by pivoting the way that we're looking at it today and looking at what could be the systemic issue that lies beneath all these surface problems that we see and feel on a daily basis. So there are thousands of different places that we could begin with this issue, but let's begin with what I think is probably in your mind right now. So I'm going to read this quote to you. We're always expanding, and every day it's getting harder to manage our surgical instruments. I'm finding smaller short-term wins, but I'd love to be the one who helps our organization figure out a true long-term solution. The challenge is there's so many moving parts and so many different people and departments involved. Getting it wrong can be disastrous, and I can't afford that. So, big hospital, small outpatient ambulatory surgery center. Does this resonate with you? Is this really how you feel? What I particularly like about it is I'm finding smaller short-term wins. So this suggests that we're focusing on resolving the problem, right? People are focusing on this daily, but they're not getting the long-term solution that they want. The challenge is there's so many moving parts and so many different people and departments involved. So getting the right instrument into the right surgery at the right time isn't the effort of a single person or a single department, right? The responsibility of the operator. That falls on the shoulders of the nurses, who are the front line, and the surgeons. It's the responsibility of your sterile processing department. It's the responsibility of your supply chain to make sure you're ordering the right instrumentation. And you also have to coordinate with and rely on your suppliers as well. So this is a very collaborative effort. And in today's world, we're all working from different systems. We all have our own different languages. So that's what sticks out to me right there. Getting it wrong would be disastrous, and I can't afford that. You know, when you sit back and think about it, these instruments are more intimate with your patients when they're in their most vulnerable state. They're naked and unaware on a table. They're more intimate with those patients than even the surgeon's hands. So this is something that needs to be addressed. That's the moral of the story. So I'd like you to just take a moment, and I'd like you to just think about what sort of instrument-related issues have surfaced in the last year for you in your center. Again, when you look at the smaller facilities and the bigger facilities, the problems are the same. It's just they become more evident in the larger facility, right? If you have a weak foundation and pour more weight and volume on top of it, the problems are going to surface a whole lot more. But the issues are the same. I used to open up hospitals around the world, and I would do planning for hospitals and help them procure their inventories. And all that was happening at one time, and that was too an enhanced reflection of what's happening on a day-to-day basis. It was just all that was happening at one point, and it's really a lot of what gave me my perspective. Let me tell you a story about a woman named Mary. She went in for a simple angiogram. As she lay sedated on the bed and her senses began to fade, she heard the surgeon ask his team for the catheter that he needed in the procedure. As she was sedated, she could still hear the sort of tension building up in the room. She could hear cabinet doors opening and closing in the room. She could pick up on the fact that the surgeon was becoming activated. And then she heard something, as she described to me, that I can't imagine any of us would want to hear. And it was, "Give me the catheter that you have." Well, unfortunately for Mary Ann, the size of the catheter that was used was too big for her artery. It disrupted plaque on the artery wall. It caused total blockage to her heart. They had to resuscitate. They rushed her up to surgery for an open heart procedure, where she lay and waited for 2.5 hours because the chest tray wasn't available. So Mary Ann's doing fine, but as her son, I can tell you that there's long-term repercussions that she suffered from that sort of traumatic event. There are issues that we can all see and we deal with every time that we're interacting. And this wasn't what brought my interest to this part of the industry, but it was a trigger point for me to really say, why is this sort of thing happening, right? Why is it still so common in healthcare? Why is this something that's still happening so frequently, where so many of our surgical delays are actually instrument related, even though they're not being documented? So as I asked myself these questions, I started thinking about what are the most common issues associated with surgical instrumentation. I said, in the situation of the catheter, it could have been a missing item. In the chest tray, it was an inventory shortage. These are all issues that you're all familiar with. Someone probably stood in this very room before and talked about one or more of these issues. You'll be at conferences in the future where people will talk about these very issues. Sterilization companies will share the latest widgets that help prevent residual bioburden on the instrumentation. Tracking companies will explain and justify the ROI of not missing or losing inventories, right? Repair companies will help you to tweak your preventative maintenance programs so instruments are not breaking down in surgery and you can increase surgeon confidence. Staff will always be continuously representing in team huddles the misrepresentation of surgeon preference items. Consultants will be paid to come in, work with your supply chains on balancing inventory so the supply meets the fluctuating volume and demand of the operating room. And your instrument vendors, we're talking about the quality of German-grade steel and the impact that has on surgery. All of these conversations will be valuable because, again, these are real things that you all are dealing with on a daily basis. But our focus on them isn't making the problem go away. The issues are really just shifting, like a balloon whose air, when it squeezes, it just moves elsewhere, right? The issues aren't going away. So there's a quote by Einstein that we've all heard at one point in our lives. You can't solve a problem with the same sort of thinking you had when you created. So the idea today is let's think a little bit differently about this issue that we have, because it is critical. Let's go on a journey together and learn something and look at what would be the first 2 steps of a really solid foundation in a long-term solution. And rather than look at the issues, let's take a moment and focus on the responsibilities of sterile processing. And it's really 4 areas of responsibility. And I kind of break them into 2 parts. front of house, just like if you were to compare it to a restaurant, and back of house. And generally speaking, the front of the house gets most of the investment, because when problems occur and assessment teams are built and designed at the hospital and they go into sterile processing, human nature is we fix what we can see, right? So most of the investment goes into the front of the house. But what are the responsibilities for sterile processing? Well, it's to manage a motivated, educated, and consistent workforce that understands the impact that their job and role has on patient care. The process is to maintain a balanced and fluid, repeatable, scalable process that can meet the changing demand of the operating room. Inventory is about having an accurate, streamlined inventory that's always in the right place at the right time. And regulations are about knowing you follow the IFU, right? To process that instrument properly so that when it's being used in surgery, there's a high degree of confidence that the way it was processed was per the IFU. So how is that going for us? Well, generally speaking, not so good. We have a workforce that is understaffed, under-equipped, undereducated, underpaid. We'll just use the word under. You've got a process that, although it's been invested in more than really anything else in these departments, it's still fragmented. It's aging equipment. You're only as good as your weakest point, right? Because it's like a manufacturing facility. Processing instrumentation has bottlenecks. And let's be frank, a lot of these sterile processing departments look like a prison sentence when you walk into them. Many of them today are still off. When it relates to your inventory, we don't know what we have on the shelves. We've never had a process for removing unwanted, unused instrumentation. There's minimal accountability to who we're buying from or how you compare to other facilities. Communication is very reactive, and a lot of friction involves around management of inventory because everybody's got a different game, right? Regulations. The big facilities surely have gotten memberships to OneSource, a database that tells you regulations. Most people don't know their login, but you have you've got the membership. Most small facilities don't have access to these databases. And when asked the question of what instruments do you not have an IFU for, the general response is, well, maybe I should ask OneSource. They don't know what instruments you have in your inventory. We need to understand what instruments we don't have IFUs for so that we can acquire them and make sure we're following the IFU. So it's not going very well. So for more emphasis, let's look at the people. Over 5,000 instrument patterns, 166 different instruments per hour, and up to 9 quality checks on an individual instrument. And this is just at one part of the process. You bring in sterilization as well, and knowing all the different cycles and all of the different parameters. It's really a complex job. And these people can go across the street and work at a Subway and make the same amount of money that they're making. I gotta tell you, I've spent some nights in these departments. I've seen a wall of instrument sets sitting at a large academic with 2 people to process them, and I felt sick, truly. I truly felt sick because I was so stressed out about the cases the next day. If it were me, I would go across the street. It's a really stressful job. And we've got to look at the impact that turnover has on consistency and quality. What I hope you're beginning to see is that all of these things are really interrelated. Processing time. Okay, we're all responsible for knowing at bare bone minimum, it takes 3 hours to process instrumentation. And that's if you're running like Toyota production systems and things aren't sitting still. In 95% of your facilities, there are parts throughout the process where instruments are sitting still and they're piling up. And this causes more problems, right? But generally, at a 20+ operating room facility, the processing time is around 9 hours because of all of those idle points throughout the process. Instruments are waiting to come to be picked up and come into decon. They're waiting at the washer because you have a bottleneck there. They're being taken from the washer to an assembly rack, and nobody's assembling them because you don't have enough staff or you don't have enough assembly tables to staff them. There's so many different areas where you can have bottlenecks that extend this time. And it's important that we come together in a line and that you understand at your facility, what is the average processing? So what's happening? So we have priority sets. I'm thinking, what comes to mind is a large academic in St. Louis that they introduced this concept of priority sets, and very quickly they all became priority sets. So that doesn't solve the problem, right? Or instrumentation. We've gone through and done the most in-depth research studies on utilization that's ever been performed. Small, rural, large, metropolitan, across the board. This is the average utilization. It's actually 42%. So that means 60% of instruments are being financially supported. Labor is the highest cost that a hospital has. Supplies are the second largest cost, growing at twice the rate. So if you can find opportunity to improve efficiency in that area, you don't need to spend more money to solve the problem, right? There's so much low-hanging fruit and so much opportunity to just increase efficiency in what you have. And I'm going to challenge you later in this session to do just that on a very small scale. Regulations. You know, it's one thing to know that you have a membership, but it's another thing to know if you're going into a total need that you have 3 instruments that are highly susceptible and high risk for quality events or bioburden events. There's data out there. There are instruments that are more susceptible just by nature because they have a lot of different moving parts and they require assembly. There's instruments that you've had incidents recorded in your facility and instruments that the same ones that have had issues outside of your facility across the country. Wouldn't it be nice to have that sort of information when you're opening up a case so that you can review it? So we're inherently good. I've worked on the strategic and kind of innovation end of communication between sterile processing and DOR for some time. We've solved the problem. So why aren't we doing it better? Well, let me share with you what I believe to be one of the primary reasons, is that this is a really complex crossroads of information. Your sterile processing is at the very middle of a really complex situation that it's out of their control. They're almost midstream. So imagine this. You have one instrument coming into your hospital. You've got over 125 suppliers that can provide you that one instrument. They all have their own name for that instrument. All of your tracking systems, you switch from one common supplier, the Mueller, to Askilab. You have 2 totally different things. So how do you change that as that sort of misinformation is flowing into your system? As a sterile processing leader, you are responsible for the surgical inventory. but you don't really own the surgical inventory. In fact, to make any sort of changes, you require the input of the coordinator and the operating room, right? But your jobs in the day are to focus on the patient. And we've all seen how stressful and demanding your roles are. So you're not accessible, you're just trying to get through the day. Access is very low. And this prohibits sterile processing from making changes or improvement to these sets without your time and participation. Supply chain, generally outside on the peripheral, right? Trying to drive compliance on a contract, not aware of which items are surgeon preference, which items are not. There's no real good justification and communication coming out for what's required in terms of a capital order, right, to balance out the supply and demand. So things are being rejected without an idea of how that's really impacting clinical operations. Administration, generally when they're making a decision, someone's fought long and hard to get some investment into sterile processing because it's looked at as a cost center. And in healthcare, with so many competing initiatives, this large sphere of influence and decision by committee and the level of turnover that you all have, it can be very difficult. And oftentimes, investments in the department look like this. Does this look familiar? You spend a year justifying more staff. And these could be really anything. Upgrading your equipment from 30-year-old equipment. Okay, you don't get the sort of enhanced performance that you were looking for. So now you change out leadership and you start all over. And the process begins again for justifying different equipment based on somebody else's opinions. This is kind of the vicious cycle that we're living in. Many of you, particularly those of you that are in larger facilities, have tried to gain back control. So you've reached out to the technology that's out there, which is these asset tracking programs, and you've invested in it. You've gone through that justification process, that value analysis committee. You spent over $100,000 on the tracking program, and now you know where things are, right? You know how they got there. You're able at some level to look at productivity metrics on the productivity of the staff processing. But they've not solved their problems. I've yet to hear one facility say, ever since I got my tracking program, I don't need to rely on my suppliers at all. Or the operating room never calls down and hollers at us. Or we have no problems justifying the level of staff that we require to properly process this stuff. Or, hey, as soon as we got a tracking program, all of our information and data self-cleans itself, and we know exactly what we have in our inventory, what the value of it is, and how much we're spending, and who we're spending on through the year, right? Informed people solve problems. Software doesn't solve problems. So we do need tracking programs, right? Regulations are changing. We do need these things, but we have to buy them for what they are, not for what they're not. And even these small facilities out there, the ones that are all still in paper or in Excel, you don't need a full tracking program, but you need to move into an electronic state at least, so you know what you got, and you can, cross-integrate across facilities and leverage what the volume that you have for better prices. There's so many reasons. So even with these investments, we're still sculpting fog, right? It's really still complex. Larger systems will send out RFPs and change. So we're just working on a system right now that changes suppliers just about every 3 years. Great intentions because they're managing over 100 hospitals. But every time they switch suppliers and they update their count sheets, all the names change on the count sheets, and the OR erupts. And the conversations of surgeon preference start flying just because people don't want the names to change, right? So it's still happening, and this is what we want. This is what we're really asking for. So here's the goal. You need to establish a stable, accurate, and accountable environment. In my mind, there's a lot of meaning behind each of those words, and I'll share some of it with you. Stable means you have a process and a methodology that outlasts your leadership. So if you get rid of a manager, your process doesn't change. You have standards. Accurate, not 98% accuracy, 100% accuracy of what you have in inventory and where it is and is not being used. So the reason why 100% accuracy is so important is because in such a high, stressful, high-tension environment, right, where people are sculpting fog and holding everything together, if you come in with information that isn't 100% accurate, you're going to be limited to someone else's opinion on what's really needed. So imagine David telling you that you don't need any more trades, but your plastics coordinator telling you we absolutely do. We suffer shortages every other day or every Wednesday. Your information has to be really rock solid accurate so that you can utilize the information. Otherwise, you're always going to be restricted to opinions. And an accountable environment. We were just talking about it earlier. What is accountable in terms of certain preferences? Like 3%, 5%, 75%? So it's not about getting rid of certain preferences. It's just about transparency and accountability for what is an acceptable volume preference. So one comes to mind is a craniotomy case where 85% of the surgeons were taking between 3 and 5 trays, and one was bringing in about 12. Right? So transparency and accountability for your outliers. So all high level, yeah, I think we're all kind of on the same page. What do you do about it? And there's really 2 primary steps, and a shift in your mindset that I'm going to promote to you today. And the first step is you establish community. That's a foundational step that has been skipped, where we really started in the middle. So let's go back to the basics, back to the very beginning. Whether or not you have a tracking, you can't have garbage data put into your system, right? Otherwise, it's not going to function for you. So let's go back to the very beginning and let's look at the value of having 100% accuracy of knowing what you have on the shelf. So what does that look like? Right now, you walk up to that craniotomy case. Case cart swings open, and immediately you notice a couple things are missing. Your battery's not on there. You're missing your craniotomy accessory tray, and all the names are different from what's on your tickets. You're looking at the inventory and the little card indicators on the sets, and it's totally different from what's on your inventory. Now, no problem, because you've been there for 10 years, and you already know the translation. But you're at a conference now, it's the beginning of the week, and your team that's filling in for you might not know all these things. So what does that look like now in your EMR? Well, you've got some different instrument names. You look down here, here's why your accessory craniotomy set was missing. In your EMR, you have one name to describe 2 different sets as it translates to your sterile process. Does that make sense? The battery's just not on the preference card. Okay? Now, and you've just got the micro scissors aren't in your tracking program. No quantities are there. So conflict checking is enabled at the point of scheduling. No locations are there. So generally speaking, your folks that are prepping for your cases are doing it all out of memory because the locations aren't in that system. So here's what that looks like when it's cleansed. So all of your information is filled in on your system. And when that translates back to that case card and you walk up to it and those doors open, everything's there. And all the names match and they're all the same. That has such a big impact in itself on the alignment and the way that you can drive co-employee engagement, the way people work together. and the sort of turbulence you have when you've got those high volume. So now you walk into your case. You open up the set, you pull out the count sheet, and your scrub tech is going to start doing the inventory. And right off the bat, have you heard the conversation of, I didn't ask for the round handle cardiovascular needle holder, I wanted a flat handle? Or this is the needle holder without the latch on it, I wanted the one with the latch. Or here's an example, a small Wheatlander missing part number. Is it blunt? Is it sharp? What is small? Define small. So there's all these, again, systemic foundational data issues that are causing a lot of the problems that you see in the field. And surgeons can get real ticked off and write an email, right, and bring in administration, and administration comes down to the sterile processing department, and 9 out of 10 times, more people, newer equipment, something on the front of the house changes. But these issues that are behind in the back of the house aren't being changed. Okay, this is what a cleansed count sheet looks like. So you're filling in descriptions that are missing over here. So instead of a Wheatlander small, a retractor Wheatlander 2x3 blunt, 4 3/8 inch. It's the attributes that you really care about in priority from what's most important to what's least important. With a standard, and that's a key word, is with the standard. Whether you have Cerner, Epic, whatever you have for EMR, it doesn't search things like Google. It doesn't have an elastic search. So if you try to find things in there, you can only put in the first word. If you misspell it, your whole list goes away, right? So you want to be able to drill down into things and categorize things, whether it's at the set level, if you're looking for vendor sets, or just cameras, or power equipment, or whether it's at the instrument level with field packs, a retractor, a needle holder. So right now, okay, you've got one product code here. This is a V. Mueller product code. Manual entry keyed in multiple different ways. And you have a different name description for each of those product codes. That builds in a lot of complexity that really limits you from looking at what you have here. Because that's really the same item. But it looks like 7 different items. And this happens over time because of manual entry. And what hospitals will often do is they'll react to it. And they'll shut down the system so nobody can make any changes. And that lasts all about 2 days because someone at 3 in the morning is trying to process a set and move it from A to B, and they can't change the count sheet. So now they're waking up the only director in the department that can change the count sheet, and that's not going to work. You got to leave these systems open up. But you also have to scrub them to make sure that the data is staying clean and accurate. So here's what that looks like when it's cleansed. Okay? A single name for a single product. So there's so much simplicity that comes along with that. Same thing for the supplier. You really want to know what you have from your primary supplier. So if you have 14 different names for that supplier, that analysis is really hard to sift through, right? It's going to be manual and take time that you don't have to be able to answer questions. And we've all had those calls. You know, we've all had those worst nightmares where the COO or the chief medical officer sends us an email and it says urgent. Dr. Smith was just in my office. This is what happened. I need answers now. When you're running back to an inaccurate data set where you don't know what's in your inventory, your information is fragmented, you start going around to your resources and all the people that you trust and know, and they all start giving you their opinions, and then you construct your email. So here's what a clean count sheet looks like. And it includes items in an asterisk that are surgeon preference. That should not be cross-referenced. That information needs to be shared with your supply chain. So they quit asking you to cross-reference items that can't be cross-referenced. It also includes a second asterisk in areas where critical items need to be reported, which means if it's missing this instrument, don't send it up to the operator. We can't use it. It's rendered useless. So these aren't new concepts, but what is new is the fact that people aren't your answer. And in healthcare, we love to throw people at an issue, right? If a surgeon is showing up late for cases, we sit down and we tell them about him or her about the ripple effect of starting cases late and the ripple effect that has. If people have turmoil or friction, we sit down, we talk to them. If a patient is feeling anxious, we sit down, right? We console them. Healthcare, we're very good at throwing people at problems. But when you consolidate the information from your tracking, or maybe that's in Word or in Excel, your EMR, your ERP, and all of your vendor data together, at size and scale, that's far too large for people to solve. So what's begun to happen in the industry is we've begun to hire instrument coordinators, where we've got multiple people full-time keying in things. Well, there's a lot of studies on just human error rates of manual entry. And if you don't, going back, don't achieve 100% accuracy, you're always going to be limited to somebody. So there's technology out there that's, computers are really designed to do this, where you throw a bunch of stuff in a pot and the computer sorts it out and tells you what it can't figure out. And so if that computer can sort out and figure out 90% of it, then 10% left over is more digestible, right? I'll give you an example. The large academic in the Midwest, operating room complaining about tons of inaccuracies and errors in the OR. Over the course of 7 years, looking back, they had fired over 5 different people that could be related to this issue. 3 of them were sterile processing, 2 were perioperatives. So we did a study on their data, and we found that over time in their tracking system, now they're taking extra steps, they're tracking them down to the instrument, which is part of the reason this occurred, is over the course of several decades, they had created over 200,000 line items for what was called an acceptable substitute. Okay? So we dumped this into this cleansing technology, and we studied automatically 170,000 line items. The result of it is 64% of what was considered an acceptable substitute was totally wrong. It wasn't an acceptable substitute. So now I'm going to look at another 30,000 items. That took 3 to 4 people the better part of a month to go through 30,000 line items. At the very end of this, one of our data scientists on the team came back and said, there's 250 part numbers that I can't figure out. So those 250 part numbers were sent over to the facility and said, hey, we can't figure these out. We don't know what the heck they are. We can figure it out. Can we just move those 250 part numbers aside and use the rest of the data? You would be limited to the data, right? You have to have 100% data accuracy. So it's important to know that if you're utilizing people, you're always going to be chasing accuracy, and that ground beneath you is good enough. Guys, this is one of the most complex inventories because it's not linear, and different varieties of instrument sets are being used on different cases, and it's in constant motion, and it's always changing. It's a really complex inventory. So as people are cleansing the ground beneath you, once you've established 100% data integrity, now we can rely on analytics to get your ducks in a row, if you will, to use and create objective business cases to justify your story. Show of hands if you've been associated with a sterile processing request that just falls short of really justifying its needs. And it's opinion-based, or it's gut-based, right? And it's, hey, I feel like we need more people, but I can't justify it. That's not going to fly in today's world. particularly, I mean, how many tracking systems out there do you can trump by a Da Vinci Code, right? From intuitive search all the time, right? Those budgets get reused and reallocated to something that can drive more revenue into the facility. So you need to be able to document the sort of cleansing that you've done, so it's transparent, so that the operating room and all of your staff is fully aware of the number of part numbers and missing instrument supplier names and product codes and vague descriptions, how much has been fixed. You need to be able to look at what's flowing through your facility daily, weekly, monthly, and what specialties, right, it's flowing for. So what instruments are moving, what sets are moving throughout your facility, what sort of instrument types are moving. You need to be able to analyze this information around a central database of analytics that everybody's looking at. Remember all those groups that we talked about that was responsible for getting the right instruments in the right OR at the right time? Today, you're often looking at different sets of information. OR is looking at EMR, electronic medical. General processing is looking at tracking. Suppliers are looking at their own information. Supply chain is looking at ERP. So you have inaccurate data. Names are different across systems. It's not linked. And everybody's looking at their own information and analytics. And as a result, they develop their own perceptions on what the problem is. So once you link all that together, you're looking at the same information to drive improvements. This is showing what is flowing based on the surgeon. So right here, this particular surgeon has 35 tray types that they use across their inventory for 34 cases. So down here is case types, here's tray types. The size of this bubble shows the average number of instruments that are going into that surgeon's case. So the fact that it's bigger than these shows that there's more instruments going into that case on average. So it's analytics that tells you where to go focus your efforts to drive improvements. This is looking at set utilization analysis. Same large academic I was just talking about with the 200,000 line items would send back 42% of their instrument sets unused from the operator. So it was a matter of looking at those scan points and a matter of understanding the time that it takes and creating a very, very logical, objective business case on the impact for minimizing the number of instruments that come back. Right? Instrument utilization. One of the challenges today, and I skipped over another one, was to go, first of all, go clean one couch. Sit down, pull one couch, and look at it, and spend 30 minutes, and look at it for missing information that you know needs to be there, and write it up in a red marker. Okay, circle missing supplier, right? If you see some variance in the supplier name, circle it. If you see a missing part number, circle it. If you see missing information in the description, write it in. One count sheet. If you send that count sheet to me, I'll send it out to one of our data scientists. We'll help you fill it out. But just experience the impact of one really clean count sheet. Not the whole inventory. Often in hospitals, we find that it's really complicated to do things at scale. But just do one. Likewise, which made me remember this, is it's amazing, absolutely amazing to figure out what it takes to remove one instrument. Remove one instrument from your inventory. Just one. And the people that will come out of the woodworks will be very telling for you when you go to remove more. One instrument. And I'll give you a hint. Generally what we'll do for low-hanging fruit is we'll just look at the average number of instruments across the inventory for So let's use mosquitoes, right? And let's use orthopedics. On average, all these orthopedic trays have 4 mosquitoes in it. But we found one that has 10. Okay? Go from 10 and figure out what that looks like. And if you need any help on that, again, happy to help, but it's such a telling thing. So those are kind of my two challenges to you. Financial analysis. These ERPs, these electronic resource planning, are designed to order toilet paper, lights, right? Everything for your hospital. What's really unique about your instrument asset is you have this added layer of complexity, which is an instrument is associated with a certain set. That has wiped any analytics off your radar. It's almost impossible to get information for what you're ordering. But to begin to increase awareness around what being ordered, I can tell you right off the top of my head, 130 OR, 30 hospital systems recognized that the value of their surgical asset was $48 million. When we were able to look at what they were spending on an annual basis, we were able to do something that I didn't understand before all this took place, but they put it on the books, and they had to appreciate it. So what that meant for that hospital system was they were actually going to report a $2 million loss to their board of directors. Well, they appreciated that asset by $8 million a year, which had a swing and brought them to the black $6 million profit. Okay, I can tell you, CEO all of a sudden knew a whole lot about instrumentation that he never knew before. Same with the CFO. But what they also found out is that it was a great OR hospital. They thought everybody was just doing a great job. That was outspending three of their largest hospitals at 130. So there's so much opportunity when you really have accurate information and analytics that you're all looking at to find, solutions to your current problems. Usage. One day, somebody will not ask you how many sets do you think you need for your inventory. Because hiding that information together, imagine just being able to go back and say, okay, here's how many sets we've got. Here's what our usage is by day over a 12-month period. We're using all of those sets, and here's how many conflicts that we have. Here's how deep they ran. Our plastic set had more conflict, more pain than any other set in inventory, and you need more of it. That's something that data is good at telling you. And maybe one day somebody will ask for your opinion, and then you have to support it, justify it. Productivity analysis. You can see the most interesting thing when really looking at your productivity. You'd be shocked to know that the average number of instruments for a department processed in an hour is 13 instruments per hour. Okay, there's time for that seems really, really low, but it's accurate. 13 instruments per hour process, and not assembled, process per man hour. There's a lot of room for improvement there. And what you find when you're really looking at the analytics is that you have some people who are just lying, and they're moving really, really fast. And what you might be able to start doing is start associating that with instance. When it's about doing these first initial steps, then you start adding further digital transformation on top of that, where you're not relying on manual paper. That's another session. But also knowing where people are spending their time. I'll give you an example of a story of how this played out. We actually found, if you look really closely here, I think application of PPT is right here. So out of all the things people were doing in this department, one of the top time suckers was application of the proper PPT. Well, we had no idea that was a surprise, what that meant. But behind the scenes, the facility was going through an RFP on gloves. And one of the things that we saw and found out is that every 20, 30 minutes, people are getting ready and they're going back and put on new PPE. And so these gloves that they were trying to justify went all the way up to the shoulders. But as they studied it, over the course of the year, it was going to cost the hospital $70,000 more to buy those gloves. After they solved this metric, they changed and they bought those because they use the information to make really good business decisions. All of a sudden, something that seemed extreme, unnecessary, became the logical answer to saving money. So, when we think back to those surface issues, the point of this is that data solve a lot of those issues, right? The same instruments are on the, the top charts for causing problems. And if you have data, you can know what instruments are coming into your procedure that are susceptible to quality events. Missing broken instrumentation. What instruments are broken? When should you be preparing instruments? How frequently should you be preparing instruments? Inaccuracies. Look at the count sheets. All of that data. Inventory shortages. No longer your opinion, but all of that data. Poor quality, right? Failure rates of instruments. Lifespan of instruments. Where they're coming from. What the raw materials are. All of this data is behind all of this information. And the analytics can help, once you achieve 100% data integrity, the analytics can help you to justify that business case. To look at predictive staffing models, right? To look at the impact of turnover versus the guys across the street. So this is where this is all got to go. But it starts with having accurate data and centralized analytics. So, and starting to try and answer questions using information. Same question that you're asking today. And with a standard, all of the issues become under control. So what this really means is you establish a standard. Here's a great example. One name for an instrument. Tie all your suppliers to that one name. So Tegra, Mueller, Scanlon is going to sell you an instrument. They're going to convert it to your name. An instrument standard, and that makes this all easier to control because that one name is now used in your EMR on your preference cards, the same name that's used in your instrument tracking, and it starts to align communication. And that's really important. You all know this with all about, and I added the big sticker right now, or the Michelle retractor, right? And we all have it. The person on the receiving I don't know what the big sticker is. Mother-in-law, pancake cooker. There's all kinds of. So establishing standards very important. So data analytics will be powerful. This is what we've seen. Is taking a step back and taking two very foundational steps to achieve data integrity and to bring people together around a common set of data. Those are the first two steps. Then at that point, you begin to automate your manual processes and digitally transform your social asset. So I hope this was an hour of it. I enjoyed it. I love talking about this stuff. And if you have questions or you need help on those challenges, those exercises, I really challenge you to do them. Please do not hesitate to reach out. I'm absolutely happy. Thank you for spending your time. Thank you for being here and being change agents for our nurses.
Hi, so I'm the lead of education, and so we also have several other programs. So this is kind of like the whole part of our solution, to really bring out the solution. And then we have specific topics on justified for staffing, based on the data, how we write business proposals, how we talk to your vendors. So just a lot of day-to-day problems that we can use this concept to solve. So we have some program brochures from, so grab one, if you're interested, and then contact us. We really use this.
And if you have any questions, I'll be up here.